The next fact to look at is the low status of women in the ancient world. It is unanimously accepted that in the ancient world, the testimony of women was not to be trusted. But let not the testimony of women be admitted, on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. Any evidence which a woman gives is not valid to offer. Let the words of the law be burned rather than given to women. There is a whole host of other sources we could look at, which shows women were believed to be less trustworthy than men. The ancient world was very clear. The testimony of women was not to be trusted. Now, take that and marvel at the fact that in the Gospels, the women are the first and primary witnesses to the empty tomb. This fact was utterly embarrassing for the early church. First, they admit they didn't even trust the testimony of the women. Then, all the early sermons found in the Acts and the epistles always skip over the fact that the women were the first to discover the tomb. That doesn't contradict the Gospels, but they tend to stay silent on this matter in order to make their early case, because women were not deemed to be credible witnesses. Yet when they write down the accounts of how it happened, they cannot leave this fact out, because they played such a key role in discovering the empty tomb. This is a serious claim, because as Richard Bauckham says, in these stories, women are given priority by God as recipients of revelation, and thereby the role of mediators of that revelation to men. The Gospels claim the women were an intricate part of the revelation of God, and the first key eyewitnesses to the resurrection, thereby making their testimony necessary in telling how the empty tomb was found. For an ancient writer, this was not something you would ever make up. Celsus even used this to try to discredit Christianity, who claimed the entire argument for the empty tomb rested on the testimony of women. N.T. Wright says, "As historians, we are obliged to comment that if these stories had been made up 5 years later, let alone 30, 40, or 50 years later, they would never have had Mary Magdalene in this role. To put Mary there is from the point of view of Christian apologists wanting to explain to a skeptical audience that Jesus really did rise from the dead, like shooting themselves in the foot. But to us as historians, this kind of thing is gold dust. The early Christians would never have made this up." So the mythic theory, or the conspiracy theory, lacks any explanatory power with this one. As Mike Licona says, even if the disciples had fled Jerusalem, Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus may have been better candidates than women for discovering the empty tomb. What about the hallucination theory? It is difficult to say if the hallucination theory could fit with this one. If all we have to go on is this fact, I suppose you could say someone had a crazy dream and thought women discovered the empty tomb before anyone else. But why? They weren't expecting it, and multiple sources seem to agree this is how it happened. Plus, it was such an embarrassing fact that everyone involved would have wanted to make sure it actually happened, and that it was not a dream or a subjective vision. So we'll allow this one to pass just to be fair, but there is really no reason why one would hallucinate this, since it was not comforting or expected to happen. But even though it lacks explanatory power, we'll allow it to tentatively pass, until we can evaluate the evidence for the empty tomb. And finally, the Christian theory has no problem explaining this, because the writers were reporting how it happened. And of course, because God is no respecter of persons, and there is neither male nor female, for we are all one in Christ.